Hi there, and welcome to another episode of Mayor of Bitcoin. On the Mayor of Bitcoin show, I try to create civil discussion in the blockchain environment. Sounds like a contradiction. Doesn't have to be. All right. So, the two topics that I am going to discuss today are the Bitcoin Lightning Network and what it means for your Bitcoins, and politics, substance addiction, and killing little ones. Okay, so if you are someone who's looking for work in the blockchain space and want to discuss your skills, please message me and I'll try to have you on the start of the show. And also, if you are a political leader in the blockchain space, such as Chris DeRose, Paul Storks, there's several others I'll mention throughout the video, and you have someone that you have conflicting ideas with, feel free to come on to the show and we'll try to set up a structured debate for a civil discussion. All right, and if you're not familiar with what we do here, let me have Paul Storks introduce.
Nonsense, and they have, oh, here's a clip of the guy behind Bitcoin.
Thank you, Paul. You're right. Mayor of Bitcoin is the guy behind Bitcoin. No, I just oversee the mayoralship. All right. So again, that was just a brief clip from Chris DeRosa's show. And if I like his show, it's very entertaining and educational. And Chris DeRose is a man who knows how to trade and get along with other people in certain respects, rather. And Paul Storks is a very nice guy. So there we go. So let's go ahead and start our discussion today by talking about the Lightning Network. All right, so I can't see on the show. Okay, there's the Lightning Network and what it means for your baby coins. So Lightning Network, many of you have probably heard about this. You're kind of wondering about this, how to use this, what do you need to watch out for, and what it means for you. All right, to go over the basics of how the Lightning Network functions, you take some Bitcoins out of the Bitcoin ecosystem. You store them on a server of your computer primarily, and then you transact with other people only on the Lightning Network. And then once you're done, or after some amount of time, you put them back onto the Bitcoin network. When you're transacting with other people, then these transactions are instantaneous versus 10 minutes, as it is on the Bitcoin network, and they're effectively free. So you could do a situation where you're sending 1,000 Lightning Network transactions for no Satoshi costs, or you could do a system where you're paying the lowest fee possible for each Lightning Network transaction. Now let's talk about the main thing I'm going to talk about here is how it works in terms of how it interacts with the Bitcoin ecosystem or the accounting system or the Bitcoins. So, if you want to know more about the technical aspects of the Lightning Network, I might recommend the Argon Group has a nice little overview. Um, Here is Lightning Labs. Elizabeth Stark is the CEO. She's very nice person, very active in the communities. Um, Asu Token. I think that's why he was picked up, because his last name has token in it. No, I don't know. But anyways, here are some of the people in the Lightning Network, Lightning Labs team, and here is Bram Cohen, who was the creator of BitTorrent. All right, and this is Paul Storks. I will mention later as to why he's a little bit more relevant there. And then, okay, I don't know why that's doing that thing. And then he works with DriveChain. That's his little video. I'll have all these links in the description. Okay, and let's get on to the Lightning Network. All right, so I'll just have this here up on screen. Let me see if I can. Ooh, that's wrong. Let me see if. Oh, all right. da 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 da. Video capture device. Ooh, no. Not gonna do that. Okay, so here is something from Reddit. I'm not going to read this whole thing exactly, but let me just go ahead and go over how the Lightning Network works on how it functions on the blockchain. So in the Lightning Network, you can think of each transaction, and this is discussing an attack vector of the Lightning Network, as well as some of the limitations. Now, these are things that Paul Storks is very well aware of, and he kind of discusses in his drive chain and side chain concepts. So um, regarding how Lightning works, you have to make a transaction every time you contribute to the Lightning Network, and you have to make a transaction on the Bitcoin network every time you close your Lightning channel. Now, what does that mean? Well, each block can contain 2,000 transactions, and the default setting for the Lightning Network at this time, which is the same default that it had when it was in test mode, I believe, is for the channel to automatically reset every 1,000 blocks. So if you have not made a transaction on the Bitcoin network within 1,000 blocks. Now, you can obviously make it more frequently, but if you fail to do it in that time, then it automatically resets. Now, so what are some of the, the pluses of the Lightning Network is that if you open a channel and you make, let's say, 1,000 transactions, that's fantastic, and then you close out your channel. Or at least, let's just say 5 transactions, 10 transactions, something like that. Now, if you're opening channels not making a single transaction, but you keep it open for a year, and let's say every 1,000 blocks, which is a week, every week you make a transaction on the Bitcoin network to verify that your channel is still valid and to prevent it from resetting, then you are actually increasing the transaction volume of Bitcoin rather than trying to ramp it up for a higher scalability. So when you do the Lightning Network, you really want to have the idea that you're going to be able to make 5 to 10 transactions for every time your channel opens or closes. If you're making less than like 5 transactions, then really you might want to just be using the Bitcoin network. So what are some, when you think about this 1,000 blocks, this is the main critical factor here. When you think about the 1,000 blocks and how many transactions can fit in a block, you can have 2,000 transactions fit into a block, and with 1,000 blocks, that amounts to roughly 2,000 transactions. That amounts to 2 million possible Bitcoin transactions every week. 2 million possible Bitcoin transactions every week. So to put that another way, if you've got the Lightning Network on the Bitcoin network, and let's just pretend the Lightning Network was the only people using the Bitcoin network, then you can have up to 2 million Lightning channels opening and closing perhaps every week with 1,000 blocks setting. So if you read the white paper, which I do encourage you to do, it will discuss this mechanism called the lockout. And the lockout mechanism, I refer to it as a reset. I believe that's more intuitively understood. Lockout kind of implies that you might lose your coins. It actually just resets to the Bitcoin value. So if you have coins and on the Lightning Network they disappear, there's a bug, whatever, and you are not able to close out your Lightning Network properly, and if no one else disputes you, then your Lightning Network will reset to the amount you contributed initially to the network and put it back onto the blockchain after a week. If you have 1,000 block lockout session, which is what is referenced all throughout the white paper, even though they do speculate toward the end some different things. Okay, so with this 1,000 block setting, if Lightning Network was the only thing transacting over the Bitcoin network, then you can have up to 2 million channels opening and closing. And let me go ahead and reference here just some bad advice. I found him primarily on the BTC subreddit or the Bcash subreddit. Um, and he gave a very detailed analysis of a possible attack vector and how to make it profitable on the Lightning Network. I think it's a very reasonable thing to analyze, but I also think that there's ways to get around it. Um, and also in his analysis, he uses a what you might call very friendly assumptions in his favor, but that's totally fine. All right, so but still, it helps for understanding the Lightning Network. So one thing that we've already discussed, and uh, no one will really dispute this. You can have no more than approximately 2 million Lightning channels if your default lockout time or reset time is 1,000 blocks 1 week. And that's if the Lightning channels consumed 100% of the Bitcoin transactions. Now, is there risk in these situations? Well, there is. There is a risk, and I'm going to just try to simplify the risk exposure there. One of the risks we're seeing right now is a DDoS attack, just people burning your Lightning channel if you do not charge Satoshis to use your Lightning channel, which a lot of people don't. It's 1 Satoshi to transact over the Bitcoin network. So why would you make it to be 1 Satoshi to transact over the Lightning network? However, if you make it 0 Satoshis, then people can try to DDoS you, which effectively it's more complex than I am going to state it, but I believe in this case it's basically two people sending transactions without offering to pay any satoshis. They're just sending the transactions back and forth at a very fast rate and burning through the computer's Lightning network. It operates like an onion or the Tor system, or I think similar to BitTorrent as well, which is to say that it it takes the information that you're trying to send, wraps it up into some people describe it as an onion, wraps it up into an onion, sends this on to the next computer. He gets a message that says send it on to another person. This happens 6 to 7 times. 7 times is what people say. So this happens 7 times, and then it's very difficult for you to know who was the original sender, who was the intended recipient, and all this stuff is wrapped up in cryptography, and it helps to preserve anonymity while sending information from your home computer, from your home server, without any intermediary and without. I don't even think you need to sync to Bitcoin all the way. I think you can just run a light node and you're fine. So it's a very interesting concept and function, very effective and based on things that have worked in the past. So it is something that will probably continue to work. The real question will be how to deal with these possibilities of attack. So one attack that they're dealing with now is the DDoS attack, and I'm going to discuss primarily a financial attack with the Lightning Network. So some people think that like everyone can use the Lightning Network. That's not really true. Some people talk about how all your Bitcoins can move on to Lightning Network, and I'll discuss why that's quite a bad idea, actually. So, um, uh, I'll primarily just go through this here. So, like as mentioned, there's up to 2 million possible Lightning channels. That's the max that can be created. Obviously, there's more people than that in the world, and obviously, there's way more Bitcoins than 2 million. Um, Up to 2 million Lightning channels that can be opened and closed over one given week if they take up 100% of the Bitcoin transactions. Now, regarding block reward, if Bitcoin is at a 1 Satoshi rate of block reward, and 2 million of that equals 0.02 bitcoins of value in terms of transaction fees. So 0.02 bitcoin, uh, 0.02 bitcoins of value is obviously very minuscule. It's 2 million satoshis to help some other people out. Okay, so if you want to try to bump the transaction fees over the Bitcoin network, if you want to clog up all the one Satoshi transactions, okay, I'm gonna stop this music. It's crazy. I was trying to I thought it'd be very pleasing and pleasant for people, but I don't think that's going to be the case. All right, so if you want to try to bump the transactions over the Bitcoin network and take up all the one Satoshi transactions you can for 0.02 bitcoins paid out over the course of a week. You might have to send a Satoshi with that as well, but you can send the Satoshi to yourself, of course, to your other Bitcoin address. Now, what would happen if people were dependent upon the Bitcoin network and they depended upon being able to transact with the Bitcoin network within 1 week? So, as mentioned, if you do not do that, then your channel gets reset to its original value. All right, so assuming that there's no dispute. So if you wanted to clog up the Bitcoin network, and you have to define what clog up means, and let's just say it goes from 1 Satoshi to 100,000 Satoshis to create a Bitcoin transaction, and we can call that clogged up, then that costs 2,000 Bitcoins to do that. Or if you consider raising transaction fees 1,000x, if that's all you want to do, you just need to spend 20 Bitcoins over the course of a week to raise the transaction fees 1,000x, assuming you are the only person transacting over the Bitcoin network. Okay, now, so what you want to think about here is how much value is held over the Lightning Network versus the value to terrorize the people, the cost to terrorize the people using the Lightning Network. So, as we discuss regarding the cost to terrorize these people, it might cost 2,000 bitcoins or 20 bitcoins, depending on the situation, how much you want to terrorize them. And it's not really that expensive. I mean, it might feel expensive to some people, but to, let's say, bring down the Lightning Network, 20 bitcoins, it's not even close to comparable to the cost to to acquire 51% of the hash of the Bitcoin, which might be something close to, I really don't know at this point. It's probably in the $40 billion to acquire 51% of the hash of Bitcoin if you're to start from scratch, assuming you're not able to co-opt someone to help you out. But to terrorize the Lightning Network, it might cost 20 bitcoins. I mean, that's pretty easy math, but $200,000. I mean, it's a much smaller fee. All right, so so what you can do is if if now with the Lightning Network, if the amount held in the Lightning Network is less than the transaction fee required to send and receive bitcoins in the Bitcoin network, then you obviously can't close it out. If you can't pay the Bitcoin transaction fee, then you cannot close out your Lightning chain over the Bitcoin network, which would cause it to automatically reset or default to whoever was able to close theirs out. And then another thing you can do, another possibility of this attack, is that if you if this would create instability and skyrocket the Bitcoin transaction fees as people panicked on whether or not they were able to close out their Bitcoins over the Lightning Network. So the cost of $200,000 to terrorize these people, it might be much closer to $40,000 if you assume other people are going to continue to use Bitcoin. You're not the only one using Bitcoin. And then regarding this person here, he kind of detailed, or she, detailed a profitability analysis regarding if you're to execute this plan, because you can kind of see that 20 bitcoins is not a substantial cost. And well, anyways, 20 bitcoins is not a substantial cost. And if you are the one, if you have roughly, let's just call it half of the Lightning Network channels, and you are the only one able to get your transactions through, then maybe you can create a 51% representation that is false. Maybe you can create a 51% representation onto the Bitcoin network, clog up the Bitcoin network, prevent anyone else from correcting you, and then you can profit in this way. Now, the way you profit is not from stealing their coins, but the way you profit is by spending your coins. So you spend all your coins, and then if the other people who are receiving your coins and assuming that they ship you goods, ship you Litecoins, Ethereum coins, or some kind of instantaneous transfer of value, money, whatever. So if you spend all your bitcoins and then you force the entire network to reset, then you get your original bitcoins back into your system. So that's the way to profit from attacking the network. And then of course logically you can extort people in the meantime. If someone's facing the risk of having 50 bitcoins and they might end up with zero after your attack's over, you might say something like, "Give me 10 bitcoins, and I'll stop my attack." Of course, you wouldn't honor that agreement, but there you go. You tell people this, people panic, people trust the random fairy. All right, so that's one thing to just kind of be aware of on the Lightning Network, is that there is some amount of value that should not be held on the Lightning Network, in my opinion, if you're using the 1,000 block limiter as to when to reset the Lightning channels. I speculate that you should not have more than 200 million in value at this time over the Lightning Network, um, as it would cost someone roughly 20 to 10 million to execute attack. 20 million if they're not a miner. But if you own 50% of the mining interest, Jihan Wu has a very significant portion. Then, since he gets the transaction fees back, or he gets half the transaction fees paid to him, then this attack might only cost 10 million to terrorize the Lightning participants. So you're spending 10 million to terrorize, let's just call it 200 million of value. There's a good chance that you could somehow work this out to become profitable for you. And that's because Bitcoin transactions are relatively cheap to send back and forth, especially at this time. Now, there might come a situation where operating over the Bitcoin network ends up costing a Bitcoin or something. Or maybe we get bigger blocks. There are a lot of people, I'll discuss this more in my political section, but there are a lot of people who are totally fine with big blocks. I am okay with big blocks too. Um, Now, what happened with Bcash is much more political drama, but the concept of having a bigger block on the Bitcoin network one day or whenever it's necessary is a totally fine concept, but you do want to kind of postpone it, as it will increase the storage requirement of your nodes quite significantly. All right. So, anyways, so that's what I speculate there, and then I go on to just talk about more referencing in the white paper actually. So this attack vector is discussed very much in the white paper. So it's not something I'm making up. It's not something Lightning Labs was not aware of. It's not something that just some bad advice discovered. But she, this person, man, I'll say a member of mankind, they did a lot of calculations to show the profitability, and I did some very minor calculations, just to kind of help quantify the scope of the attack and the possibilities of Lightning Network. So at the end of the white paper for the Lightning Network, they suggest setting your lockout time, which is the time, because you can change this to whatever you want, which is the time of when the Lightning Network resets over the Bitcoin network. They suggest changing it to 26,000 blocks, or effectively twice a year. So if there's a mistake in the Lightning Network, if you lose your coins after 6 months, you would get your Bitcoins back, assuming that there's no dispute. So they use the idea of 26,000 blocks, and then they also suggest if all 7 billion people in the world were using Bitcoin and the Lightning Network, then we'd need 133 megabyte blocks. I do like that's just thrown out there. I think it came up to like very very huge amounts of storage. That's 133 megabytes every 10 minutes. Regardless, though, storage is relatively cheap compared to some other things. So, however, at this time, I assume that they are using the 1 megabyte, not like 2 megabyte ideas and stuff. But at this time, we are at 1 megabyte, so we are 133 of that. And then instead of 26,000 blocks, we are using 1,000 blocks, or 1/26th of that. And so if you take the idea of 7 billion people each running the Lightning Network, this brings it down to 2 million people running the Lightning Network as the max possibility at this time, or 2 million channels. Obviously, one person can open, 1,000 channels. And then uh, and then that's assuming that Lightning Network comprises all of the Bitcoin transactions. And then if you say that Lightning Network should not comprise more than 5% of the block space, then these 2 million channels becomes maybe about 100,000 Lightning channels before you will start to see some serious congestion. And I refer to it as collapse. I think that's going to be how it feels to people. Um, and there's already about 1,000, 2,000 channels on the Lightning Network. So 100,000 channels could be set up very quickly. I mean, we could have that by April or May, let's call it, if we're not careful. It's 50x more than today. But it's fairly easy. They're making one-click apps to set it up on your computer. My buddy, I think he's already got it set up, and some tutorials say like learn how to set up the Lightning Network in 30 minutes. I didn't really link that here right now, but and then other people make apps. You just click blah blah, it's set up. So if 100,000 people, I don't know how many people are in the blockchain space, but I speculate it's more than this. If 100,000 people set up Lightning networks, and if you say that there's only 5% free block space at this time, you're going to start seeing a pretty quick escalation in transaction fees, and this might cause a few disruptions. So the easiest way to fix this, and this is what I suggest very strongly, is to set your lockout period, instead of 1,000 blocks, set it to 10,000 blocks. Now maybe there's some reason not to do this, I do not know. But I think the 1,000 block was used in the white paper for simplicity of calculation and so forth. I think 10,000 blocks are every 10 weeks, or about 3 months. But every 10 weeks of resetting your bitcoins, should you experience a problem, I think that's a much better idea, and it'll help to prevent the ease of this attack. So regarding this attack, which currently, let's just say it costs around 20 bitcoins to do this attack. Well, if you set your network to 10,000 blocks for the reset, then it costs 10 times as much, or 200 bitcoins, or 20,000 bitcoins, or what have you. And likewise, instead of being able to hold, let's call it 100,000 possible Lightning channels, well, now you can hold 1,000,000 Lightning channels. So more channels than the people who are likely to install the Lightning Network. So I should have opened with this, but it's good to think about the Lightning Network as if, whereas Bitcoin you have hash, which determines consensus, and on the Lightning Network you have Bitcoin transactions, which determine consensus. So if you're trying to get the Bitcoin transactions, if you're trying to keep the Lightning Network functioning properly with people trying to get on and off and for the network consensus to reflect the correct value, then you need people to be able to transact with Bitcoin. So we all have some memory about over the holidays, hurts our head and stuff, but over the holidays, it started to cost $50 to send Bitcoin at sometimes. I mean, it gets a little crazy sometimes in the holidays. Now, the exchanges are doing batching more. And when you have the exchanges and these things doing batching, um, then it's unlikely that the holiday boom would, especially if it's consolidated. Like let's just say Coinbase represents a very substantial portion of the uploads in the upload of U.S. dollars into Bitcoin over the holiday period. With batching, it's going to be a much better scenario. Did not have that integration set up over the holidays, as far as I know. And like for example, I think Binance is still using one Bitcoin addresses, so they're not even doing SegWit over at Binance yet. But as we get into SegWit, as we get into batching, then there is going to be more space in the Bitcoin network. But should there come a time where over the holidays the transaction fees escalate to, like, let's say $50 to transact over the Bitcoin network, and let's say around that time, for whatever reason, mass adoption of the Lightning Network also picks up, um, and and then let's just say at that time, someone also decides to try to clog up the Bitcoin network by just spamming transaction fees to themselves, and if that person happens to be owning a 50% interest in mining operations, so they get half of the transaction fees back paid to them, then you have a very cost-effective way to create some serious disruption in someone you might refer to as your competitor. But you have a very cost-effective way to create serious disruption in terms of Bitcoin cost and or real dollars. And so this is something to just be aware of. This, of course, can happen at any time, but it would be easiest to execute over the holidays. It would be easiest to execute right after a mass push for people to get onto the Lightning Network. It'd be easiest to execute if you had significant interest in mining operations, so that you got half of your transaction fee back. And if, as mentioned, if the amount of value you had on the Lightning Network was less than the cost to transact with the Bitcoin network, like less than $50, or in the case of attack, let's just say transaction fees rise to $200, then you will not be able to close out your network properly. Um, and of course, if people are facing the risk of losing all their bitcoins or paying the $200 transaction fee or whatever it could be, then you might have a little bit of a chaos effect, and people just trying to push it through super super fast, and then the transaction fees even escalate more. This is one thing. Just some bad advice. They really go over that very well, and I think that those calculations are very interesting. The concept of it actually executing and being profitable, I'm going to call a lot more questionable. But in terms of how minimal, like in terms of the cost effectiveness of terrorizing the Bitcoin network, considering right now if you wanted to destroy all one Satoshi transactions for a week, it only costs you 0.02 Bitcoins. I mean, come on. For a year, you could do it with one Bitcoin. You can just terrorize the Bitcoin network for almost a year. That's a little crazy. Regardless, um, so there's that, and then so that's the ideas with the Lightning Network that I want people to take away. Considering setting the lockout time to 10,000 blocks instead of 1,000 blocks. This would escalate the cost to perform this attack by tenfold. And then also consider, if you put values onto the Lightning Network, make sure that your values will always exceed the transaction fee so that you'll be able to close out your Lightning channel. But at the same time, don't put so much value on the Lightning Network. Like, let's say you put in, I sort of recommend no more than $200 million at this time. But if you put $200 million in value over the Lightning Network, realize that for 20 million or so, people can make a serious disruption on your $200,000 value. So if we keep this a little bit more reasonable, um, then this will create quite a benefit for a lot of people. Now, the leader of the Bitcoin subreddit, let me just find him real quick. Uh, they they made a good point that they kind of see the Lightning Network more as almost an internal Thamos, that they see the Lightning Network more as an internal system for Coinbase, being able to transact between account and account, and you might see exchanges using the Lightning Network rather than people purchasing things over Amazon, as mentioned. If we have 100,000 people using the Lightning Network purchasing things over Amazon and having 100,000 channels, we're already going to be at near max capacity. But for exchanges and other high frequency transactors of Bitcoin, then having 100,000 channels or having a few channels creating millions of transactions per channel between each on and off Bitcoin transaction, then that's a very effective use of the Lightning Network. If you're using the Lightning Network to make purchases like with Amazon and McDonald's and all this sort of thing, then I don't think it's going to scale well enough. So, all right, that covers that stuff. And now I am going to go into politics, substance addiction, and killing little ones. So, regarding politics, I wrote an article here for the Avalar group. It's a group that I'm part of and I associate with. And in this, just to be very brief here, I talk about three different forms of governance, or three different things that governance can refer to, and I refer to protocol governance, distribution governance, and social governance. Okay, because a lot of people use the term governance generically. For example, when Nick Zaspo, when he uses the term governance, he's almost effectively, exclusively referring to protocol governance. And protocol governance on the Bitcoin network refers to the hash power. Whoever has the most hash power controls controls the judgment of the Bitcoin network. If you have more hash power than everyone else, then the judges are always in your favor, no matter what. There's no way to get around that. There is no arbitrator beyond he who has most hash. He who has most hash is the winner of the Bitcoin network. Then there's another form of governance I reference here, which is distribution governance. You see this talked about quite a lot, in particular in the community. And in terms of the Bitcoin network, the distribution is exclusively to the people who have the most hash power. So the people with the most hash power, they control who wins the battles in the protocol, and they also get 100% of the new Bitcoins issued. In a proof of stake model, the people who previously purchased coins or whatnot, they are the ones who get the distributions. And like Steemit, I reference here, Steemit is another good example of distribution governance, where if you contribute to the Steemit platform some form of meritocracy and also oversight, then you get coins based on doing that kind of a function. So that is a distribution type of governance, or economics or accounting, you could say. And then I say social governance. Now, social governance is really what most people are familiar with. And when most people hear the word governance, they associate with social governance or politics, or the methods of forming decision, the methods of deciding right or wrong, philosophy, but also political discussion, you know. So, so in social governance, this is where people kind of think more of Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, socialism, these forms of governance, monarchy, oligarchy, etc., meritocracy. So, in terms of social governance, that's just effectively the social behaviors that go on. I don't have them on screen right now, but I was in a discussion with Philip Diane, and there is a fella who just referenced that there's always going to be a form of social governance that exists beyond the blockchain. So okay, so regarding that, there's protocol governance, which is the mathematical system of deciding right or wrong. And when Nick Zaspo was supporting the protocol governance system, he he kind of referenced it's akin to measuring the weight and size of coinage. I enjoy that. The trial of picks, and you actually have judges measuring coins. It's pretty cool. And then distribution governance. This is what a lot of people talk about when they think, blockchain should serve the world. And just to be clear, in the Bitcoin white paper, it is very explicit that the intent of Bitcoin is to distribute the coins equally between everyone who owns a computer. Okay. And then social governance is the politics. This is what most people think of as politics, or method of decision making. You can also refer to it as that. How people get along. If there's like in Ethereum, Vitalik holds quite a lot of weight. So uh, if Vitalik holds a strong opinion for or against something, then in some ways it's pretty hard to override that. And then in the Bitcoin network, it's a very similar thing, where the OGs, as they call them, the OGs hold quite a lot of weight, and social governance is a lot of what creates the division in the world. Um, Vitalik wanted to work with the Bitcoin network. They effectively kicked him out. They said that we're not going to listen to you, some regards, something like this. I'm not sure exactly what happened. Um, and he said, okay, well, I'll just do my own thing. And there you go. And now you have Ethereum and Bitcoin. And then now you have these groups clashing time to time. Um, uh, Ethereum just released something called Plasma Cash. I think it's pretty cool, but the concept, it's a sidechain system that uh, that uses Merkle trees to prevent the DDoS type of attack. But anyways, Plasma Cache is a very interesting system. Um, but okay, so that's something that I think is good for people to think about when they think of the term governance, and when they're talking to people in particular in the blockchain space. I think it's very good to separate whether or not you're talking, and not to talk about them all at once, to separate whether or not you're talking about protocol governance, distribution governance, or social governance. Okay, so that's what I have there. I'm not gonna go on with the rest of that article. And then so so that's something to think about. Now, social governance. Social governance can be quite difficult. This is one of the things that, like, let's just call it, people have not figured out. So here is one of the CSO of Blockstream, and he has a disagreement with Cobra, and he says nobody should listen to Cobra. He is a terrorist. Um, you might have heard that in the news regarding Muslims and other types of people, Russians. Muslims and Russians are a group of terrorist people. You can't really trust anything a Muslim or a Russian says. Anybody from the Middle East, in particular, if you're in Europe. Oh gosh, bless. And anyways, moving on. So so there we go. Do 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 do. Now he says, don't trust. You can't. No one should listen to Cobra. Unfollow him. He is a terrorist. And then Cobra responds, just calling out what it says a lot about the company culture, and disagreeing with people uh, without responding to their opinion. I fully agree with that. Um, just using what I reference here is using appeal to the mob as especially with educated people. Like you know, it's one thing if neither one of you know what you're talking about, but the CSO of Blockstream is definitely familiar with Bitcoin. Cobra, who owns the Bitcoin.org, which is the primary site referenced in the Bitcoin white paper, uh, uh, Cobra is very familiar with Bitcoin, and appealing to the mob is a very bad idea, and it's what creates division, unnecessary division, in the blockchain space. It's fine if two people have two different ideas and they both help each other out. There is plenty of room in the blockchain space for all kinds of people. Not everybody needs to support Ethereum or Bitcoin, but all the same, or Monero. But all the same, these are things to just keep in mind, like how to get along with people. Okay. Um, Philip Diane, I like his analysis of governance. He takes it seriously, which I think is worthwhile. And he kind of referenced that governance or maximalism is a type of religion. So I'm going to talk about maximalism a little bit. So with maximalism, and I'm totally fine with people being a maximalist. Uh, Basically, what being a maximalist means is that you're very, very, very familiar with one product, and you're not very familiar with other products. So if Bitcoin is all you know, you should be a Bitcoin maximalist. If Ethereum is all you know, or you know very much more about Ethereum than other products, then you really should be an Ethereum maximalist. Um, so that's now this is in terms of investment, but obviously you're going to be feeling the best around the things that you know the most about. Um, Now you can also get into a mode where you want everything else to go away, and that's of course unrealistic, unproductive, um, and it definitely sets you up to be a jerk to people without needing to do so. To refer to the group that you don't understand as a terrorist killing machine, right? This we see this all the time. All the people that you've never met before, they're freaking terrorists. Let me tell you. The people that only exist in minority segments of your community, the people who you can easily overwhelm and drown out with your voices and your pitchforks and your flames and your breaking of glass, whatever it may be. These people are the Indians, as it was in America at the time. We said that Native Americans were terrorizing our towns, and the Native Americans were told that the settlers were terrorizing their villages. So it goes back and forth, and it obviously benefits the people who are not participating in the argument or the peacekeepers. Um, for those unfamiliar, American politics is not very well discussed, or the American Revolution. It's a very interesting time. There's something referred to as the King Philip's War. That I'm talking so fast, but anyways, going on. I got stuff to do. So there's something referred to as the King Philip's War in the American Revolution, and King Philip was a Native American or a native of the continent, and the Jesuit priests of Europe convinced him to attack the settlers, um, to attack the Continentals, um, and take over their lands and become the king of the Native Americans. So then the European forces, they told the settlers that they would create peace and protection if the settlers only agreed to give up their vote and their social right. Um, and I can't I think to some degree it worked, but it created a lot of resentment and a lot of political education and the way that war works and the way that disagreements work between people. This happened primarily. I think it was John Winthrop, who was the governor at the time, who was most pissed off at the idea of his leadership creating division between the people that they were trying to commune and trade with. Um, but it's a very effective form um, of rule. Daniel, I'm just going to mention him briefly. Uh, Daniel ha- Daniel has a multi-part series. Um, I will talk about this a little bit more next time on how to stay away from cults. All right. So or okay. So then Philip here. Philip talks about this situation here. Now I'm gonna peruse what he's. I'm not really gonna go into what he says, but Philip is very upset over the way that Ethereum and Bitcoiners interact with each other and how hostile they are toward each other. And Nick Zaspo, who is one of the long-standing members of Bitcoin community, um, he says that as long as charlatans, which is liars, as long as charlatans insist on treating block size as a political football, as political well, as political football instead of technical security setting, Bitcoin is in danger. And Vitalik goes on to mention how the size of the blocks is not terribly very much a security issue. But what Nick Zaspo was really talking about there when he says political football, um, he's referring to the nature of the way that it was discussed, referring to the way that referring to the way that two sides were just shouting at each other, not listening to one another. It's me or them, us or them. Make your choice. You cannot like people who use Bcash. If you like Bitcoin, you cannot like Bitcoin if you use Bcash. Um, and regarding the 2x debate, the issue, a part of the issue there was just not the entirety of the community was in support of the 2x change. Obviously, they weren't supportive of some other changes too, but 2x was a hard fork, so you needed everyone to agree to it, whereas SegWit was a soft fork, so it's quite a difference. I'm not going to go into that here. Um, Regardless, so this is what when Nick Zasbo says Bitcoin is in danger, even though Nick Zasbo is a person who kind of favors some form of meritocracy, the people having the most knowledge and skills making the decisions. Uh, he's really he's really insisting upon the community splitting, the constant division in the community. This is the danger. Political football with Bitcoin. That is the danger, not the size of the blocks. Obviously, they can't be too big, but 2x is totally fine in terms of security protocol. Uh, that's not the issue there, but it's the way that people are shouting at each other, not respecting one another, not working together, um, and being led by cheerleaders to hate one another. That is an extreme danger in the blockchain community as a whole. This is part of the thing that creates nation states, as we're familiar with. France, the people of France needed to die to stop the Huns and the Germans, and people of Germany need to die to stop the English, and people of Russia need to die to stop the Nazis, and people of different nations, Mexico, are coming over to America and raping our children and whatever people say. So these kind of nationalistic divisions, a Mexican person is same as American person or U.S. person, speaks a different language, different culture he was raised in. Very true, but people are people. There you are. And if you start accepting this nation versus that nation, you're one step toward wanting to kill them. And then if you start accepting my language or your language, my culture or your culture, absolute this or that, all or nothing, no half measures, then you're en route toward barbarism or barbarism. So there's some real worries there in the blockchain space in the way that the communities interact with each other, and also the way that the communities are developing toward financial interests rather than unity, um, and the different ways that they're prioritizing who represents leadership in the blockchain space. So, anyways, I think that was Philip smacking me. But in either case, I'm not going to go on into what I replied there. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that, and then regarding regarding killing the little ones and substance addiction and so forth. Um, when you have people who become emotionally irate and yelling at one another, and it's my way or the highway, uh, these people are, quite frankly, often addicted to some kind of substance. Maybe it's coffee, maybe it's pill, maybe it's a psychoactive drug, maybe to calm them down. You know, um, maybe it's some other drug, marijuana, heroin, coke, whatever. But all these are. It can be also sugar. Um, there's all these substances that come into the body, and if you don't control uh, and you don't periodically cleanse your body of these substances, they then they can strongly affect your mood, and they can cause you to become more upset or more depressed than you would otherwise, or otherwise hinder your judgment. So in older people in particular, because humans kind of calm down as they age, in older people in particular, when you see like angry older people, they're probably drunk or recovering from not being drunk, or there's some other kind of substance that they have and don't have that they're coming off and down. Coffee definitely can be coffee, a big variety of things. So really be careful uh, of uh, the things that control your mood and control the way that you interact with other people. Um, And also, I have on here "Killing the Little Ones," and I just have a picture of a football stadium. Now this is UT. We're all kind of getting along in this setting, but regardless, when you throw a batch of little people into a classroom, into a class, and you say only the smartest will survive, only the best will make it, the world is too polluted for your people. Uh, there's too many humans on Earth. Some of you have to go. There's too much pollution on Earth. You're just a creator of pollution. Um, the millennials are lazy and terrible and disrespectful. And the way that we treat our children they're uh, as if they're one of millions, and we don't really raise our children to be profitable in the world, then you have a very terrible system that encourages, and you get children to fight one another in sports. This is a common thing, but you also learn cooperation and competition in sports, and that's great. But sometimes you make it seem like you have to kill the other children, in particular in combat. You have to kill the other children in order to survive. Um, that's a very negative view. It's not accurate. It's not what Benjamin Franklin discussed much at all. Regardless, now the lame to school. The lame to school is they have a very interesting system of human development, where they take the humans and they force them into profitable professions, and they do not charge you money for learning these courses. And then if you go on to earn roughly two times what the average American earns, then you go on to pay for the classes of the Lambda school. Now, their school setting is much more intense. It's much more like a work environment. Oh, but within 6 months, you graduate and they kick you out, and then you go about trying to make twice the money of the average American. Now, this is an excellent way to raise humans and to raise the human environment. And it's also good for, just to talk about this a little bit more, uh, for the people of wealth, which will always be the parent. The children shall never have wealth. They'll, comparative to the parent. It's also good for the parent to consider investing in the child's endeavors. Education, I very much question the worthwhileness of paying for an education at a large university. I definitely question that. But with the Lambda School, for example, you don't even pay. They take 100% of the risk. Um, and it's 6 months of intensive training, and then they put you into the workforce, and there you go, trying to acquire money and provide contribution to society. So this is just one example of how to succeed as a race of humans. And then and the Benjamin Franklin model, which I very much support, he has something called the junto, which was effectively where a group of people, 12, a group of people would organize in secret to create prosperity for each other by sharing the knowledge that they acquired over the week, and sharing their prosperous ideas. So this is in morals and philosophies and other kinds of things. It's not all just money focused. It's very much on acquiring the right kind of philosophy to own the world. Um, but the Juto is an excellent system. It's very excellent. It's like the Lambda. It's similar to the Lambda school, except you do it yourself. You get 12 people, and effectively, the most successful or the smartest of those 12 teaches the other 11. You have no cost to it, and then I'll talk about this more next time. But then you can acquire quite a lot of wealth yourself if you're the teacher of those 11, because having so many children in your family, if your children are actually if you take ownership of them, then you can make them profitable for you. If you ship them off in a crate, then they might end up costing you money, and then you only want to have one or two children. But if you can turn your children into pots of gold, as they sometimes reference, if you can turn your children into pots of gold, then having 20 children is not an issue. And for the younger people of the world, in particular, who have been quite persuaded by this type of evil thinking, the world is a very large place. 7 billion is not too many. 50 billion is not too many. Uh, Maybe 500 billion, I don't know. You might be approaching times where the resources of the earth are insufficient for human life or other life. Um, but it's just in the way that we organize, and it's the way that we develop our children. And if you like Vitalik, he developed himself when he was around 15. He quit his warcrafting ways and went on to he might have a worth of around $1 billion at this time at the age of 25. So within 10 years, he became industrious and took a kind of lambda approach, but teaching himself and learning with the Bitcoin community. But then the Bitcoin community did not sponsor his growth. The Bitcoin community kind of kicked him out to some regard. And also, regarding the Bitcoin community, which I find very appalling, regarding since miner centralization, since ASICs, so forth. But there's very much the idea that you need to own Bitcoins, and then you contribute to Bitcoins to help the entire community. Well, if you have one or two Bitcoins, which is $20,000, which I don't know many young people who start off with $20,000 who didn't come from some amount of wealth in life. You're still only owning a millionth of the potential that you're giving to the network. Young people can contribute quite a lot of sweat equity, as Paul Storks wisely states, and you need young people to keep coming in because they also contribute a lot of technological learning. Older folks, they have one way of doing things, and whenever you have new technologies, it's really best to force the young people into the newest technologies and then they'll have a place on the earth. And then also you can continue your own things, and you can retire quicker if you invest in them. And like Lambda does, you take a percent of their profits. So, anyways, um, that is something that's definitely missing in the Bitcoin community. It's just something to think about. Uh, the idea in the Bitcoin white paper initially was that one CPU, one vote. And this is a very big deal. It's very important, I believe, to Hal Finney. Regardless. Um, okay. But yeah, very important to Hal Finney. And it's just something not true today. Mm. Fuck. Fuck. Anyways, it's not true today. And uh, the now does this interrupt the protocol of Bitcoin? No, it doesn't. Not in particular. The hash concentration of Bitcoin, so long as one person doesn't substantially, let's just say, control more than 50%, even though it is a very big problem. But so long as someone doesn't substantially control more than 50%, then the hash protocol governance of Bitcoin is quite functional. However, the distribution governance, which is insanely important when it comes to understanding the true nature of how Byzantine consensus works. The distribution of Bitcoin is absolutely vital. And currently, 50% of all the new Bitcoins issued, go to a few different entities, and this is quite a substantial problem. And it will continue to cause errors in the Bitcoin community. I meant to cut this a lot shorter, but I already talked about how someone with just a few Bitcoins, and especially if they own 50% of the hash, how they can terrorize systems such as the Lightning Network for a very low cost. They can terrorize the Bitcoin network itself also for a very low cost relative. I mean, the amount of new Bitcoins issued currently is just a lot. It's just a lot of Bitcoins are issued currently. You have 650,000 Bitcoins issued each year, and 300,000 might go to one entity, which is roughly $3 billion. So, and that's for controlling of the patented technology that they use, controlling the ore, using the nation state to acquire more power, and seizing competing operations. So you really have a big issue. People are obsessed about the protocol getting destroyed because someone does a hash attack, which of course can happen now. But they also seem to just kind of gloss over the idea that everyone who contributes to the Bitcoin network, all the children who contribute to the Bitcoin network, 50% of 50% of their contribution goes to the benefit of one person or one entity. This is an extreme problem. There is no kind of social justice or no kind of social reward for contributing to the Bitcoin network now. Yes, you benefit all the people who previously bought Bitcoin, but really the person who controls the hash also, you contribute to their wealth very substantially. And regarding Byzantine consensus, if one person is much more concerned with the validity of Bitcoin than the other people, then the consensus model dies. So if you have one person who owns 99% of the Bitcoins and everyone else owns 1% of the Bitcoins, then there's no, even without the hash protocol, then then the people, the vast numbers of people who are splitting and dividing 1% of Bitcoins, they have no interest in whether or not the protocol works or not. And that's part of the two generals problem, is that you have two generals with a common goal. Once you have it to where one person controls the majority of the goal, or one person controls the majority of the owner interest, the owner benefits, then you have a very substantial problem. And this has to deal with the distribution governance of Bitcoin. not the protocol, not the social is a different issue, but this has to deal with the distribution governance of Bitcoin. My I have a suggestion to fix this. I'll just go ahead and state it now. But my suggestion to fix this in the short term, although I am supportive of a proof of work change, which Monero is doing, I also am very supportive of, and if anyone does this, I know that they'll do very well, of just changing the Bitcoin protocol to effectively not distribute new Bitcoins or take it down to 1%, or instead of distributing 12.5 Bitcoins per block, take that down to 3 Bitcoins per block. That will both preserve the historical distribution percentages and ownerships of Bitcoin, which were much, much, much more fair before monopolists came into power. But more importantly, there's still quite a big number of Bitcoins to distribute. It might be around 15% of future Bitcoins to distribute. And if one person's gathering half of those Bitcoins, then I refer to it as a post mine. It's like but it operates the same as a pre-mine operation. Um, uh, by the time Bitcoin effectively ends its distributions, you might have one person who mined 20% of the Bitcoins. So what's the difference between one person who mines 20% of the Bitcoins after it's created versus a person who mines 20% of the Bitcoins, when it first starts out, or a blockchain when it first starts out? So you should think about these things, and the importance of one CPU, one vote, the importance of a return to some kind of social distribution, and therefore naturally rewarding the social children who participated in the development of the Bitcoin project, and then likewise for the elders of the Bitcoin project to invest in these people. Don't tell them, oh yeah, well, you work for the government or somebody, you work for somebody else, he will pay you money, we have no use for you, we will not offer you money, you contribute to us for free, you are the slave and you have 1 millionth of a benefit of your contribution. This is just not very effective, and it's so ignorant, so incredibly ignorant. And you see the people who are between 15 and 25 flocking to the Ethereum economic system, which effectively says if you create an ICO, if you create a product, then you can get rewarded with financial wealth, with actual money. You are not creating an ICO, you're not creating a product, a token, you're not creating this solely for the exclusive benefit of the prior purchasers of Ethereum or the people who mine Ethereum. There's ways for you to actually get rewarded for your skill and labor, and that's something that's very difficult to find in the Bitcoin community, and it's something that will come to head. And just that last little bit, I just want to reiterate, particularly when you talk with elder folk that get angry often. Quite often, it might have something to do with substance addiction. So just be aware of that. And if you're an elder person, control what, not control, but cleanse your body time to time. I drink coffee, yeah, sure. But cleanse your body time to time. And watch yourself when you're absent the substances that are come to you. And children of the world, whatever, the young people, don't feel like the world can't sustain all of you. Don't feel like 2 children are too much for a family. Don't feel like you're a cost, you're a burden. If you work hard, blah blah, you study hard, you contribute well. There's always a place for you. There's always a reward for having you. It's what nations are built upon. It's the glory of civilization. Um, okay. Um, uh, Here's some more reading on principles of blockchain. Here's some more reading on the. All right. Uh, Here's the Bitcoin Core Outreach Project. If you want to support the Bitcoin Core community, they have a series where they help you discover who are the leaders you can trust. Um, I like this project. I think it'll be successful. Here's Donald McIntyre. He's he formerly worked with I think Morgan Stanley. I don't have it with me right now. But anyways, uh, he discusses governance here, and I do suggest checking out his videos as he summarizes some of the ideas from Vlad, from Vitalik, and he's also he seems to be trying to encourage cooperation in the communities, and I think that's something uh, everyone needs to support more and more and more. Forget this maximalism, as Daniel might say. Don't beware the cult, beware the cult. Um, and as Philip also, who dislikes the maximalism type of way that it creates anti-intellectualism. And all right, so in my next video, just to give you a little clips of what I'll be talking about there, it'll be much more on economics and finance. I have to get back to freaking doing accounting. I was taking a break. This went way too long. So the next video, and if you need a job in the Bitcoin space, blockchain space, if you have the skills to perform the job, but people don't know who you are and you don't know how to advertise your skills, I would love to introduce you on my show. And if you're a political leader in the blockchain space, if you're someone who develops the blockchain space, and you want to have a political debate about certain ideas with somebody in a very civil manner, I hope that I can help with that, and I will try to create some balance there. So, anyways, regarding the next topic the next time I do a show will be much more financial in nature. Uh, One of the ideas will be profiting through paganism and how not to join a thing, primarily inspired by Daniel. Uh, and then another idea that I'll be talking about is oscillating currents and other pyramid schemes for friends and family. All right, so that concludes our show. And now, if some of y'all aren't familiar with Bjork, so she kind of married into stardom, and this is kind of her introduction here. So let's see if she kind of knows what's going on.
Jail here.
I seem to get the picture, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I know what you mean. What exactly do you mean?
Enjoy refreshing time.
Fair enough, Bjork. Fair enough. Fair enough. This is a great episode of Space Ghost. If you haven't seen it, Bjork and Tom York on the show. I think I kind of take after Space Ghost. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. I'm not half as funny. DeRose is probably much closer. So, anyways, thank you very much for your time and for listening. And let's see what comes of the future. All right, good night.